The velvet curtains were closed, and the crown was already behind glass. The first bid was going to be made. A man moved forward from the back of the room, not a buyer, not a guest, but a royal guard, and in full view of foreign collectors and Camilla herself, he took the crown off the pedestal and walked out. Everyone knew it wasn't theirs, so no one stopped him. Before we continue, please make sure you're subscribed and have the bell symbol turned on, and don't forget to like the video if you liked it. It helps me a lot. Also, please leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from, because what you're going to witness isn't a crime. It's the time when one royal guard reminded the monarchy what a crown actually meant. That Tuesday morning, the legacy chamber murmured open for Sergeant Marcus Lyle, 37 years old and a veteran of the Coldstream Guard in Afghanistan. But those campaigns seemed far away now. He had found his actual mission here, surrounded by glass cabinets carrying the Queen's personal things. Case 14 stood out from the rest because it caught the morning light. The crown of the Queen was within. Not the ceremonial things that tourists knew, but something special. The base was lined with white diamonds. The light hit the Scottish gold, and a teardrop sapphire sat in the middle of the top. Marcus was there when she wore it for Prince George's first official picture. "It's not heavy enough to be ceremonial," she had said, "but too precious to be casual." He opened the case with gloved hands, checked that it was there, and then wrote down the inspection, still using pen and ink, which she had chosen. The crown was in the right place, and the diamonds inside the case sparkled in the light. Footsteps came down the hall, probably the new curatorial assistant that Camilla had hired. They kept asking smart questions about how to make things more accessible and get more people involved. A young woman who meant well but talked about the Queen's personal items as if they were museum objects that needed better lighting to be displayed. Camilla herself didn't go to the legacy chamber very often, but her presence was felt throughout Windsor, like a strong scent. There were now modernization committees. People started using the phrase heritage optimization in meetings. There were even rumors about working with private cultural foundations, whatever that meant. It looks like they were making things easier by meticulously changing the past to make place for the future. Marcus locked the case with a quiet click. There were some things that couldn't be improved. Some memories were designed to stay right where they were, in the hands of the people who had lived them. He stayed there for a little more, watching the light play on the crown's surface through the glass. The simplest job was perhaps the most important, keeping everything where they belonged. 3 days later, it started with something that could have been a coincidence if Marcus believed in them. 2 maintenance workers were concluding their shift near the service elevator and talking in the quiet tones that staff used when they weren't sure who might be listening. Marcus wasn't listening in. He just walked around more silently than most people thought a man his stature would. Viewing tonight in Belgravia, they flew buyers in from Dubai for it. Private showing then. Very private, the kind where phones get checked at the door. Marcus slowed down long enough for the words to sink in. Belgravia. Viewing by appointment. People from other countries who buy things. He didn't stop to ask anything. That would have been seen, put away, and brought up in the wrong conversation. He put it away himself and went on with his rounds. But something had changed in his chest. It was the same feeling he had when he walked Point in Helmand, when the scenery looked the same as the day before but felt different. When your gut feeling starts to talk before your head does. He saw an entry in the digital access record that hadn't been there that morning. External appraisal H. This was during his usual inventory review later that afternoon. At 23:17 the night before, Trellin Heritage Consultants checked in after hours. There was no second signature or consent from a supervisor. Someone with access codes just took what the system called a ceremonial object for examination off-site. Marcus looked at the television. He didn't know who H was. Trellin Heritage Consultants wasn't on the list of approved vendors he had memorized, and off-site evaluations needed to be scheduled 2 days in advance and approved by 2 people. He typed on the keyboard to bring up the records of the physical inventory. Item temporarily relocated pending documentation was written next to case 14. He was already walking before he fully understood what that meant. When something was awry, the legacy chamber felt different, not in a way that could be seen. The lights were the same, the temperature was kept to museum standards, the silence was as deep as ever. But Marcus knew before he got to case 14. The crown was missing. Not just moved, but gone. The casket was empty save for the silk cushion, which still bore a faint mark where the crown had been for months. There was no broken lock, no broken glass, and no marks of forced entry. There was just a lack of presence where there should have been presence. Marcus stood perfectly motionless for 30 seconds, just like he had been taught to do when things went horribly wrong. Don't say anything. How to do it? make a plan. Then he turned around and proceeded right to the archive wing to look for Lady Helena. When he walked in, Lady Helena Trent looked up, put down her letter opener. She said, "It's gone. Not a question. Taken away last night. No proper authorization." She reached for a folder he hadn't seen. "I've been keeping an eye on these little things, brooches, earrings, and so on, for evaluation." She put a page from a catalog between them. Belgravia Private Heritage Auction Exclusive Preview. Item 7. Ceremonial Crown. Diamond Sapphire. Mid-20th Century Royal Provenance. Tomorrow night, Helena added, starting bids in the hundreds of thousands. Marcus felt something cold and sharp settle behind his ribs. She's not selling it directly. She's using middlemen, like heritage consultants, who specialize in discreet transitions. It's all very proper, very legal, very thorough, and very final. Helena nodded. Once it's sold, it's gone forever. No government intervention, no public outcry. Just quietly shipped to Dubai or Hong Kong or some private museum in Switzerland where no one will ever see it again. Marcus looked over the catalog page again. Professional, real, and really bad. There has to be a way to stop this. Helena's smile was as thin as ice in the cold. Only if someone knew where to find it before the auction started. Camera 4 showed the truth at 23:16 2 nights prior. Camilla entered frame wearing a dark coat, followed by a man with a transport case. No security, no documentation. 8 minutes later they emerged, the case heavier on exit. Marcus watched it 4 times. The man wore a pin on his lapel. Belgravia Private Heritage. They'd planned this, coordinated it, and tomorrow night they'd finish it. Marcus shut the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the sounds of the old building settling about him. After that, he started to plot. The envelope came when Marcus was doing his nighttime inspection. It was put right on his pillow, and no one on his floor could explain why. The kind of stationery that cost more per sheet than most individuals produced in a day had thick cream paper and gold-embossed edges. There was no return address or postmark, only a crest he recognized from the society pages. The Arlington family arms. Old money with ties that go back hundreds of years. The statement inside was clear. Exclusive heritage preview. Tonight, 8 p.m. Belgravia House, Eaton Square. Strictly private. No recording, no press, no name, no RSVP instruction. It was only assumed that whoever got this would know what it meant and why they needed to be there. Marcus flipped the invitation over in his hands. Real gold foil and heavy paper that didn't yell about the wealth behind it, but whispered about it. Parking validated. Discreet entrance via Muse was written in smaller letters at the bottom. He carefully folded the invitation and put it in his jacket pocket. Then he started to get ready for a night he had never been asked to go to. Belgravia House looked like a limestone castle in Eaton Square. Marcus came up in regular clothes, a dark coat, pressed pants, and a look of wealth that opened doors without asking. He was speechless in the main gallery. Crystal chandeliers lit up cabinets full of medieval manuscripts, crown jewels, Fabergé eggs, and the Queen's crown, which was the main attraction. It drew notice even among priceless objects. But in the light of the auction, it looked weak, like a lion in a zoo. The sign said, Lot 7. Royal Diadem, circa mid-20th century, opening bid £300,000 for something that wasn't theirs to sell. Quite extraordinary, isn't it? Marcus turned. A woman in her 60s stood next to him. She was elegant in a way that came from generations of breeding, rather than recent affluence. She looked at the crown with the appreciation of someone who knew what they were looking at. Oh, it's not just the craftsmanship. Her eyes gleamed with intimate knowledge. It's the closeness. This isn't ceremonial regalia. This was personal, worn by choice rather than obligation. She walked closer to the display case. People say she wore this for family events, christenings, and private dinners, times when she was more of a grandmother than a queen. Marcus kept his face blank. One picks things up, she said with a smile. You seem to know a lot about it. I get it, but tonight is the last chance to see it in person. After that, it goes to private collectors. Disappears? That's the point, isn't it? It will be discreetly placed with collectors who value privacy over publicity, which is much better than gathering dust in some boring archive. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. Some people might say that some things should not be private. The woman's smile never changed. How wonderfully old-fashioned of you. She walked away into the crowd, leaving Marcus alone with the crown and the growing feeling that he was running out of time. He saw a familiar face across the room, next to an exhibit of medieval illuminated manuscripts. Queen Camilla was standing with her back to the chamber, talking softly to a man in a fancy suit. Marcus could see the tightness in her shoulders, and the way she carefully changed the tone of her voice, as if they were having a private conversation. She turned a little, and for a second their eyes met across the gallery. Her face didn't change. No surprise, no recognition, simply the dull knowledge that two strangers are in the same place, but the way she looked at him informed Marcus that he was not a surprise here. The auctioneer had a voice that could make a grocery list sound like poetry. It was rich, erudite, and trained to get people's attention without seeming to demand it. "Thank you for coming tonight, ladies and gentlemen. As always, your discretion is both appreciated and necessary. The things we have for you tonight are opportunities that come up rarely and go away quickly." The crowd murmured in anticipation. People put their phones down. People stopped talking. Being there when someone got something that couldn't be replaced was exciting, even in a room full of people who were used to being rich. The auctioneer went on. "We start with Lot 7, an item of extraordinary beauty and impeccable provenance, authorized for private consignment through proper channels, documented and authenticated by recognized experts." Marcus's pulse rate went up, but his breathing stayed steady. "Opening bids start at £300,000. Do I hear £300,000? A paddle went up at the back of the room. A woman with pearls bidding like she was purchasing groceries. £300,000. Thank you. Do I hear £350,000? A Middle Eastern man Marcus hadn't seen before, who was very still since he had a lot of money. £350,000. Great. £400,000. The woman with the pearls again. Marcus moved forward, not in a big way or with a startling movement that would scare security or draw unwelcome attention. He just took one step closer to the primary display, putting himself in a place where his voice would be heard clearly. "That crown is not for sale." The words weren't yelled or even very loud, but in a place meant for quiet trades and secret exchanges. They might as well have been artillery fire. Everyone's head turned. No one talked anymore. The auctioneer even stopped, with the gavel halfway raised, not sure if this was part of the show or something else. Marcus stepped forward again, with his hands at his sides and his back straight. That crown belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. It was never meant to be sold privately, and it was never meant to be auctioned off to strangers in a room like this. Someone in the crowd gasped. Phones started to go up again, but this time they were recording instead of taking pictures. The auctioneer spoke out. "Sir, I must ask you to." "It's stolen," Marcus continued, his voice carrying clearly through the gallery. "Removed from Windsor Castle without proper authorization, documented as an appraisal that never happened, and brought here under false pretenses." A ripple of unease moved through the crowd, the kind of shift that happened when expensive people realized they might be witnessing something illegal. Camilla's voice broke through the tension from across the room. She moved forward with studied authority, chin high, every inch the queen consort, and said, "You are wrong, Sergeant." She was talking to a subject who had forgotten his position. "This is a legal heritage transition. All the paperwork has been looked over and approved by the right people." Marcus turned to look her in the eye. "What channels?" The question hovered in the air like a challenge. People in the audience started to realize that this wasn't a show or a publicity gimmick. This was real. "You are not in uniform," Camilla said again, her voice getting stronger. "You are not on duty. You have no power in this room, and no right to interrupt a legal proceeding." "I have an oath," Marcus said simply. "To whom?" "To the crown, and that includes protecting what belongs to it." He walked slowly and carefully, approaching the display case with the crown in it. "Sir, please step away from the display," the auctioneer said, his professional demeanor starting to break down. Marcus didn't pay attention to him. He opened the exhibit cabinet with firm hands. No alert, no fight. There were no security precautions other than a basic latch that expected no one would dare. He took off the queen's crown. He was usually startled by how heavy it was. Not hefty, yet weighty enough that it was more than just metal and stones. It seemed alive in his hands. The gallery lights made it warm, and every facet caught and reflected light like memories do. He turned to face the room, holding the crown gently in both hands. This crown was on Queen Elizabeth's head at some of the most private events of her reign, like family christenings, private rituals, and times when she chose to be both queen and grandmother. His words could be heard clearly in the quiet gallery. "It's not a commodity. It's not an investment opportunity. It's memory made real." Camilla moved closer, and for the first time her composure broke. "Return it right away. You have no right." "I have every right," Marcus said, his voice still calm but with a new steel edge. "Someone has to stand between what matters and what sells." More phones were filming now. The crowd went from being intrigued to being completely captivated, as if they knew they were seeing something that had never happened before. The auctioneer said, "You can't just walk out of here with a priceless artifact," but his voice didn't sound very sure. "Look at me," Marcus said. He started strolling toward the gallery exit, holding the crown tightly in his hands. He moved at a steady pace, as if he knew exactly where he was going and why. Camilla's voice behind him soared with barely controlled rage. "This will ruin you. Do you get that? This will cost you everything." Marcus stopped at the entrance to the gallery and turned back around. He said gently, "Some things are more important than jobs." He then stepped out into the London night with the Queen's crown in his hand, as if it were a promise he would keep. No one went with him. No one called the police. No one tried to stop him. There are times when people in a room full of individuals who buy and sell everything nonetheless know that something isn't for sale. The journey back to Windsor was completely quiet. Marcus was in the back of the taxi he had hired from 3 blocks away from Belgravia House. He had borrowed a museum-quality travel case from the Legacy Chamber that morning to keep the crown safe. The driver, a Pakistani man with nice eyes, looked at the case once and didn't ask any questions. Some talks weren't designed for people who didn't know each other. The case was next to Marcus on the seat, belted in like a passenger. He kept one hand on it the whole time, not because he was afraid someone would steal it, who would steal something from someone who had just stolen it, but because he needed to stay physically connected to what he had found. London blurred by in streaks of light and shadow outside the windows, the city where people made and lost money and where history was bought and sold like any other good. But at least one piece of history was going home tonight. His phone rang twice with numbers he didn't know during the trip. He let them leave a message. By dawn, there would be more of those calls. By the afternoon, they had turned into a flood. But tonight was about finishing a job that had begun the moment he saw the empty display case. In the dark, floodlit turrets of Windsor Castle rose up in front of them, casting sharp shadows against the gloomy sky. Marcus gave the driver cash, gave him a big tip for being quiet, and then carried the case across the courtyard like a holy object returning to its shrine. As Marcus walked through security, the night duty officer nodded once. No questions asked. No report of the incident was submitted, just a professional acknowledgement that some business was done outside of conventional channels. The Legacy Chamber greeted him back with the same quiet. Marcus proceeded through the dark room by memory instead of sight, weaving his way between glass exhibits to the empty pedestal that had been on his mind for 3 days. He opened the transport case with steady hands, raised the crown with the respect it deserved, and put it back on its silk cushion. It fit perfectly, and was in the right location, as if it had never left. With a faint click, he locked the display case and closed it. The sound resonated around the room like a period at the conclusion of a lengthy sentence. He only let himself breathe out after that. Marcus stood alone in the dark, surrounded by the memories of a lady who had trusted him with her legacy. For the first time since his previous tour of duty ended, he felt the deep satisfaction of a job well done. Tomorrow would come penalties, like interviews, investigations, and maybe even the end of his career. Tonight was about something simpler, making sure that the Queen's crown was where it should be when the sun came up. He looked around the room one final time, then stepped out into the hall and locked the door behind him. There were some tasks that couldn't be given to someone else. Some timepieces never stopped. King Charles met with him in the same private study, where they had talked about the Legacy Chamber assignment 3 years before. There was no pomp or ceremony, just a quiet knock and a steward who had clearly been waiting for Marcus to arrive. The king sat next to a dying fire, still in the clothing he had worn the day before. He looked like a guy who had spent the night fighting with choices that would not end well. A folded copy of the Times from that morning was on the table next to him. It showed a picture of Marcus going out of Belgravia House with the crown in his hands. "Royal Guard disrupts auction, seizes crown," read the headline. Marcus stayed at attention until Charles told him to sit down. He then pulled a sealed envelope from his jacket pocket. Inside was a written account of what had happened the night before. Charles took it without saying anything, but he didn't open it. "Tell me," he stated plainly. Marcus told him everything. The missing inventory, the video of the sale, the auction brochure with its clinical description of Lot 7, and the room full of strangers bidding on something that had been on his mother's head during happy times. Charles listened without saying a word, and the firelight made it hard to interpret his face. When Marcus was done, there was a long gap between them, like someone was holding their breath. The question was asked without blame, almost like a conversation. Marcus said, "I thought it was right to return. The crown was stolen from Windsor. I brought it home." Charles stood up and headed to the window that looked out over the east garden. The groundskeepers were already hard at work, even though it was early. "My wife will be very angry." "Yes, sir." "The press will want to know more." "Yes, sir." There will be investigations, questions, and maybe even charges. Marcus straightened himself a little. Charles moved away from the window and said, I understand, sir. Good, because I plan to make sure you don't have to deal with any of them. Before Marcus could say anything, the door opened and Camilla walked in without saying anything. She moved with careful precision, and every line of her body showed that she was barely able to hold back her rage. Her morning outfit was exquisite, and her hair was flawlessly styled, but her eyes showed the frigid anger of someone whose well-thought-out plans had been ruined by a single act of conscience. She didn't glance at Marcus or even recognize that he was there. She talked to her husband as if they were the only two people in the room. I assume you've heard. I've heard his side, Charles said thoughtfully. His version? Her voice might have frozen water. He messed up a legal deal, embarrassed me in front of international collectors, and took property that wasn't his to take. Property that wasn't yours to sell, Marcus replied calmly, which made her look at him like a whip crack. It was extra stock that was gathering dust in a room no one goes to. I wanted to make sure it went to a good home instead of being stored away. It was appreciated, Marcus said. The woman who wore it. The woman who wore it is dead. The words fell into the room like stones into quiet water. Charles stepped forward, and his voice had more power. Enough. Both Camilla and Marcus looked at him. The crown goes back to the legacy chamber, he declared with a calm certainty. All related paperwork will be sealed. Without my direct written permission, there will be no more sales of personal regalia. Camilla's calmness broke down utterly. And what about me? What about my power as queen consort? Charles stared at her, with a gaze that may have been sadness or relief. Your authority covers state functions and public ceremonies, but not getting rid of my mother's things. The stillness that followed was deep. Camilla then stood up straight, raised her chin, and gave a smile that could cut glass. I understand. Is this your final decision? Yes. She nodded once, turned without saying another word, and left the room with the same calm, precise manner that she had come in with. Charles sunk back into his chair like a man who has been holding his breath for hours until the door closed behind her. He said to Marcus, Do you know how much you cost me? Yes, sir. And you do it again. Marcus looked him straight in the eye without blinking. Charles took up the report that had been sealed and held it over the flames. The envelope caught fire rapidly and turned to ash that went up the chimney. He remarked, There will be no official record of what happened last night. There's no investigation and no punishment. According to palace records, the crown never left Windsor. He got up and shook hands. Marcus stood up and shook hands with him. It was a hard, short handshake that showed they both understood what it was like to serve something bigger than themselves. Charles responded simply, My mother made a good choice. Then he went back to his chair, picked up a different folder, and started reading as if Marcus had never been there. The firing was soft yet final. Marcus walked back through Windsor's hallways, where the morning sun streamed through old windows and created long shadows on stone floors that had seen hundreds of identical moments, quiet fights and hard decisions, the weight of obligation against the price of doing what is right. He passed staff workers who were getting ready for another day of keeping traditions that had been passed down through the generations. They were polishing silver, arranging flowers, and doing other morning chores. Some people nodded in agreement. No one asked any questions. Some stories should be lived instead of told. When Marcus got to his room, there was one envelope on his desk. There was no official seal or letterhead, only his name written in precise calligraphy on cream-colored paper. Some duties go beyond protocol. Thank you for remembering what matters most. CR was written on the inside of the paper. Below that, in smaller letters, it said, Your assignment continues as before. Marcus carefully folded the message and put it in the same drawer where he stored his deployment medals. Another way to say thank you for your service. This is another reminder that some battles were fought without firearms. He put on his dress uniform, fixed his ribbons, and got ready for another day of watching over things that couldn't protect themselves. The Queen's crown was behind glass in the legacy room, where it belonged and where it would stay. The diamonds caught the early light like captured stars. Sergeant Marcus Lyle stood next to it, with his back straight and his gaze focused, ready to guard memory itself. There were some things that weren't for sale. Some timepieces never stopped. Some jobs survived longer than the people who did them. The crown sparkled in its container, safe and sound, with just the man who had brought it home and the silence that preserved its secrets. Should a royal guard put his job on the line to defend the memory of a deceased queen? Did King Charles do the right thing by going against his wife's wishes? Or should devotion to family come first? And what would you have done if you had found someone selling parts of history that belonged to everyone? Leave your opinions in the comments. We read all of them. If you think some legacies are worth more than money, hit the like button and tell us. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, and then tell someone who still thinks royal guards only stand around looking impressive that they do a lot more than that. Our next story is about what happened when a foreign ambassador sought to scare a royal guard at a state banquet and found out that silence can be more potent than any threat. Stay where you are. Click on the video that is already on your screen. Tomorrow at the same time, the same dedication to the stories that matter. Keep in mind that some things in this world can't be bought, and it only takes one person to make sure they stay that way.